Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, San Francisco's premier author interview program. Joining us today to talk about a book called Pretty Birds, which is a novel, is a fellow by the name of Scott Simon. Yeah, it's that Scott Simon, the fellow you hear on NPR's Weekend Edition every Saturday morning. Thanks for stopping by.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You know, the Washington Post, in reviewing your book, brought up something that I wanted to bring up right away. They talk about the book as being compelling.
Yeah.
And it's the work of a reporter who seems to have easily made the transition to writing first-rate fiction.
Yes.
Why did you turn this into fiction? I mean, you were over there. You were covering the scene. And you're a journalist.
Well, a couple of reasons. One, enormously practical, and the other compelling, but not necessarily practical. The practical reason is I think there have been a fair number of nonfiction books about the war in Bosnia and the siege of Sarajevo, and I just didn't see how mine would be an improvement over Roger Cohen's Hearts Grown Brutal, or my colleague Tom Gelton wrote a wonderful book called Sarajevo Daily about the daily newspaper that continued to publish. But I also think that what happened in Sarajevo moved me so much. I think that novels have a way of reaching into people and touching them and moving people in a way that nonfiction doesn't, in a way that journalism doesn't, even broadcasting doesn't. And I wanted to try and write something that had some of the chance of having that emotional worthiness to people.
The other thing that I feel so often when I read fiction for this program is that fiction, it gets at truth in a different way, such that it can get into nooks and crannies of truth. If you will, that expository writing doesn't.
That's absolutely true, because it requires an act of imagination, and imagination is an important part of who and what we are. I think particularly in a situation like the siege of Sarajevo, which was literally unimaginable to people before, the people living there certainly, and I think by having to engage in an act of imagination that identifies with people, you can write something that pierces through. And look, I have learned as a reporter, as blessed a life as I've had in journalism, that journalism and what we do can only go so far, so deeply into a soul. And I think that's where the novel has a better chance of taking over, and that's what I wanted to write.
Because of what the imagination can bring.
Yeah, exactly, The imagination, which requires an act of total and absolute identification with someone.
Okay.
Beyond sympathy, beyond empathy, absolutely identifying someone.
What's really good about this book, I think, is that
I hope everything is good about it, Jim, up to and including the quality of the print. But go ahead.
Print is pretty good.
Yeah, okay.
I like the way, at an early place, it captures the essence of what that Sarajevo is. The father is half isn't half enough for them, he's saying. Yes, them, or too much, don't you see? They want purity, ethnic cleansing. My father was a Serb married to a Jew. I married a Muslim whose mother was a Croat. Serb, Croat, Muslim, Jew. What does that make you and your brother, he asks. We have no name, and now we have no place.
Yeah.
And that's what's going on. And that's, of course, a very serious thing. And, again, from the journalistic standpoint, this is ethnic cleansing. But from this book standpoint, this is killing people and disrupting lives.
Yeah.
And yet there is the way you approach this in the early part of the book, I wrote down the word, and you may not like this, I wrote down the word nonchalant. That the people were just going ahead.
Yeah. Well, they couldn't possibly imagine what was ahead, because Sarajevo was a sophisticated, cosmopolitan place, if I may, a lot like San Francisco for that area of the world.
Okay.
Not just in terms of having ethnic and demographic diversity for that area of the world, but a great city like San Francisco, like Sarajevo, is a place where people come to turn their lives around. Maybe they grew up in the countryside elsewhere and they come to try something different. And that Sarajevo was and is now getting back to being that kind of place. And they just thought they were too sophisticated and cosmopolitan for the dumbness of war. It just didn't make any sense to them. They thought, surely good sense will prevail. This isn't going to happen. We've never lived that way before. And they were amazed, really, that brutality could take over people that they had known.
And yet at one point, the daughter, the main character, I guess,
Irena Zarek,
says, this place makes me sad. The world makes me sick. All the talking makes me sick. Every day they talk and talk about us in New York and at the UN in UN languages. Every day we overhear soldiers in the street talking about us in French and Arabic. Every night people talk about us from London and Washington.
Yeah.
And yet they don't know anything.
She goes on to say, if I might quote myself, something like, "I'm sick of talk. It's the way intelligent people break wind." Or pass gas, I think is what she says. I said break wind because we're on radio, but I think I can say pass gas. We're talking about a piece of literature. And I think I understand that viewpoint. I think for somebody who lived through the siege of Sarajevo, there was a feeling that all the talk amounted to nothing.
Irena Zarek is the woman we're talking about. She's the hero of Pretty Birds, and we're going to meet her a little better when we come back.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
Scott Simon is the guest. Pretty Birds, a novel, is the book. It's now a Random House trade paperback, leaving you absolutely no reason not to buy at least 3 copies. 1 for you and 2 for your closest friends who didn't get around to buying the hardcover.
That's what I like to think, yeah.
Yeah. A pretty fair country novelist, Scott Turow, says this about Pretty Birds. Pretty Birds marks the most auspicious fictional debut by a journalist of note since Tom Wolfe's. Wow.
Yeah.
This novel, about a wonderful teenage girl enduring the mad years in Sarajevo, is always gripping, always tender, and often painfully funny. It is a marvel of technical finesse, close observation, and a perfectly pitched heart. Wow.
Yeah,
congratulations.
And
it is all of that. And let's talk some about Irena Zarek. Mm-hmm. She is that teenage girl enduring the mad years of Sarajevo. Wonderful character.
Yeah. Well, when the novel opens, she's on her high school basketball team, one of the stars of her high school basketball team. She's of Muslim and Serbian, but mixed ethnic heritage, Muslim family, and her best friend Amala is from a Serbian family. And she's a jock. She loves basketball. She loves rock music. She loves Madonna. She loves her parrot, the title character, Pretty Bird. She loves her family. She, I think I can say this on the air, she's beginning to experiment with, boys, yes, or men in her case.
Yes, she is.
And
particularly
boys too.
Men in her case.
Yeah, particularly men in her case. And she's a free spirit. It wouldn't be fair to say that she'd given no thought to politics or those ramifications, but not a lot. She's been, like a lot of teenagers, a little bit selfish and self-centered, and that's the world that she knows. And, of course, she's drawn out of it by events, and she has to confront it. But
one of the things that she reflects in what she's interested in is the fascination that Sarajevans have with American popular culture.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things scarce, of course, in this world, and the thing that she most cherishes is getting a copy of some of the magazines that feature rock stars and so forth.
Actually, American and British pop culture, to be sure, English-speaking pop culture, the Euro-Atlantic culture, which is Madonna, which is Beastie Boys, which is the Clash. I'm speaking of her generation, and it means the future to her, as I think it did to a lot of people in Sarajevo, that was the future that they were working
and she
with.
Also has a crush on a United States basketball player.
Well, he's actually Croatian. He played in Sarajevo, Toni Kukoc, who had just signed his contract when the siege began to play with the Chicago Bulls, which were much admired in Sarajevo, and they couldn't believe that their Tony was going over to play with Michael Jordan. And Tony was the best basketball player ever to play in Sarajevo for Temasarajevska, and was his picture was put up on the back doors of a lot of teenage girls in that city, and I imagine a lot of teenage boys too.
Probably. Yeah. Now, things get serious for her. when a gentleman by the name of Tedic, I don't think I ever caught.
Tedic is how we pronounce it, yeah. Miro
Tedic becomes her mentor.
Yeah, he's a former
brings
high school,
her into the conflict.
Yeah, former high school assistant principal, and one of my favorite characters in the book, because I think he represents to me somebody who we would walk past on the street, the marginal man of mediocre identity, but when war occurs, he blossoms.
He's the assistant coach on the far end of the bench.
Exactly.
Yeah,
he says, I am the one who declaims the brilliance of the likes of you. Of course, you would never see me before. But he sees her standing in line for water, as I recall, and remembers her and wants to, thinks she would be a good recruit for what he has in mind, some of the stealthy activities that Sarajevo was undertaking to protect itself. And all of his kind of low talents, which kind of go unrecognized when you're an assistant high school principal, are called into play in the unimaginable circumstance of the war. Yeah, perfect for the war, you know.
He runs all of this behind a front called the Sarajevo Beer Brewery.
Yes, absolute brewery. It's still there, but in real life as well, it became a center for stealthy activities. It was the one thing the United Nations kept open on that side of town during the war because it was over the only supply of potable water. Mm-hmm. And they thought, as Tedic says at one point, that it was important to Sarajevo's culture to keep the brewery going. And as Tedic says with some asperity, he says, well, apparently they think it is more important to keep our culture alive than to keep us alive.
One of the things that you hit real hard is the UN.
Yeah.
And the whole notion of the helplessness of UN presence in Sarajevo.
Yes, well, this is a fact. Certainly it's something that Sarajevans felt, and I think we see it more clearly now when we see the helplessness of UN personnel when confronted, when they were on patrol in Rwanda and did not prevent that genocide, and now, of course, in Darfur.
And on and on,
yeah.
on and on. We have one more segment with Scott Simon, and one thing I'm going to get him to talk about is a cameo appearance in this book of someone we all know.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email JimFosterCoc@gmail.com.
This is Jim Foster. It is Conversations on the Coast. Our book today is Pretty Bird, a novel written by Scott Simon, now available in a Random House trade paperback edition. It always makes them happy when I do that.
Oh, it makes me happy, too.
I really like to do that. Mm. Now, a novelist that I admire, Alan First, had some good things to say. Powerful and riveting, he starts. Scott Simon's Pretty Birds is the best kind of war novel about the reality of war, day by day, about what it does to the human heart, and about who wins and what that costs.
You know, that's a great compliment to get from Alan First, of all people, whose books I admire a lot. Yeah. I hope, in addition, and there are scenes of shocking violence, to say the least, in the book, is you have to be when you're writing a book that's set in the middle of a war. But I hope the one quality that I find sometimes books set in wars aren't really successful in describing is the killing cost of idleness. The moments of terror are separated by absolute idleness, in which you have nothing to do. Your mind is exhausted. It begins to prey on you because you can't see any way out of that situation. And that's when some of the mental cost and emotional cost really takes over. You begin to eat yourself out from the inside out.
One of the things that First mentions is that your book goes into who wins, and I'm still reflecting on that. I don't know if anybody wins. I mean,
the Bosnian Muslims held out. They survived, and they now live in a country that's a multi-ethnic democracy. It was at the cost of 250,000 lives. I think what's important to remember when it comes to the Muslims and mixed ethnic people of Sarajevo, they couldn't surrender. Remember, they tried to surrender in Srebrenica, in Vukovar, in a score of other places throughout central Bosnia, and they were slaughtered. Yeah. They were so surrender, even if that's something, the option they chose, they couldn't even really surrender. So I think we appreciate that better now. Win is a hard word to use, but they survived.
The Los Angeles Times, in writing about it, calls it a true-to-life tale spun out with frontline immediacy, black humor, and a cameo from Osama bin Laden.
Yeah. When I was in Sarajevo as a reporter, we know historically that he showed up at one point at least 2 times. There were reports as many as 7 times, but at least 2 times that can be verified. Now, I used to hear talk about, there's the Saudi prince who comes when they have deliveries of guns and weapons. And honestly, if somebody told me in 1993, would you like to meet him? I probably would have said, well, we're too busy covering real stories. so I can't take credit for a lot of prescience on this score. But in any event, I do that to show some of the rivalry that existed between these European, cosmopolitan, drinking, espresso swilling, rock music, wearing tight pants
and
Muslims. And the people in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait who had an oar in that struggle because they were trying to establish, I think it's safe to say, a beachhead. And their argument became very compelling to the Muslims of Sarajevo. They would say, what do you mean you're European? The Europeans don't consider yourself European. What do you mean you're westernized? Look at the way that America is turning its back on you. We're your only friends when it really comes to count.
And he has a long speech in the book about all that's wrong, with
Western culture.
With our
it's a
Western
pretty compelling
culture. Speech,
isn't it, if I say so myself?
And I thought
you're about to sign up until he got to the Jewish stuff, right?
I thought I was reading Updike's Terrorist again.
Yeah,
because the main character there, Ahmed, makes similar speeches.
The best propaganda obviously has a grain or more than a grain of truth. I think it would be a mistake to read through those words and at the same time also not read the virulence of his hatred, not just for Jews, which of course is bad enough, but for anybody who doesn't share his particular opinion.
Yeah. So what about Sarajevo today? I mean, there's obviously, I think if one reads this novel, I think they get the sense that you're in love with the place.
Oh, yeah, very much so. It's smaller than it was obviously before the war, and the wounds of war are a little raw. There are lots of Muslims who feel that the world turned their back on them, and they're aggravated. There are the Serbs who live in Sarajevo today who feel that they advance with suspicion through the town. But still, it's dedicated to being a democracy. It's multi-ethnic. It's a city of great culture, great nightlife. It's a wonderful place. I love to come across people in my readings who say they're going to Sarajevo as tourists.
Yeah.
They want to see some of the war monuments and stuff, but they're going there as tourists because it's an interesting Middle European culture.
And it's a beautiful place.
It's a beautiful place, right in the middle of a lot of mountains. Wonderful, bracing alpine climate, particularly in the summer. It's wonderful to smell that cool, clean air, and the scent of pine that comes rushing in from the forest, even in the middle of town. It is kind of a crossroads, also for the old Ottoman Empire. It's a fascinating place, filled with wonderful music and culture, and taverns that are open late night. And
it isn't far from Dubrovnik.
It's not far from Dubrovnik, no. It's, I only went there during the war, but it's, a couple of hours by train.
Did you catch the novelist bug? Are you working on another novel?
Yes, now? I am, assiduously. I have to finish it within a few weeks. Yes, I have a new novel in the works for Random House, and I have to finish it. It's not, I have a couple of ideas in the works, but the one I have to finish now is set in Chicago.
Okay. We are going to let you go off and work assiduously.
Thank you.
And you are Scott Simon. The book is Pretty Birds, and it is time for everybody to go out and buy the Random House paperback edition. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email JimFosterCoc@gmail.com.